My fair citizens of Sodium City, today is the second batch of 10 cards that I'm most excited to brew around in Kaldheim. So if you missed the first 10, make sure to check out yesterday's video and enjoy. The 11th card we're going to go over is Open of the Omenpaths. This is a fantastic card that I'm not sure if it's going to go in every single red deck I make or just a few. I haven't quite decided how abusive I want to make this yet. So it kind of depends on how much use I get out of it or how much I see being able to be used out of it. So it is a 3-mana instant. Choose one, either add 2 mana of any one color and 2 mana of any other color. Spend this mana to only cast creature or enchantment spells. Or the other mode is creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. Nobody gives a fuck about that, right? Adding 4 mana to your mana pool for 3 mana really isn't all that great. I mean, it's fine, it's okay, it's kind of whatever. However, if you're running something like Primal Amulet, where it makes all your instants and sorceries 1 colorless less, this then becomes a 2 mana, add 4 mana to your mana pool, which can be very good. Or once you flip Primal Amulet, you're paying 3 mana to add 8 mana to your mana pool, which is very good. Or if you're running Double Vision, you can double that mana, which again, very, very good. Keep in mind that you can only spend this mana to cast creatures and enchantments. I do find this odd that it is an instant though, since most creatures and most enchantments don't have flash. It's just weird to me that this is an instant. So one of the off cases that you can actually use with this and really utilize it is going to be with Ashiok's Erasure. So on turn 3, you can open the Omenpaths and Ashiok's Erasure some poor soul. If you only have 3 mana up and it's like 3 red, someone's going to cast something to be like, they don't have a counterspell. Like, regardless if you have Tibalt's Trickery or whatever. If they cast something and you're like, open the Omenpaths, Ashiok's Erasure, that would be so infuriating, but it's hilarious. There are some mind games you can play with it, although the actual use cases of it, I don't know how much you can really use of it at instant speed. I think Open of the Omenpaths is actually going to go perfectly within a, believe it or not, Escape to the Wilds deck. So Escape to the Wilds, a 5 mana card where it's going to exile top 5 cards from your library. You may play an additional land this turn, and you can play all those cards until the end of your next turn and then exile them. So this can be very good because it will net you 1 additional mana, which is very good. If you get it within the cards that are exiled from Escape to the Wilds, it just nets you that 1 additional mana to get stuff from the exile. So if you're doing this very early on, if you do Escape to the Wilds, you play a land and play Escape to the Wilds, and you just pull a bunch of expensive spells, it can be very difficult to cast the things that you really truly want without losing them all. So there are some downsides of Escape to the Wilds, but I think Open the Omenpaths is going to be a very good bridge to help all of the downsides kind of dissipate. So keep an eye out for that. It is something I'm looking at pursuing. However, everything else, as far as flashing in an enchantment or something, I don't know what I would do with it. So if you have any ideas, let me know in the comments section below, because I would be really interested to try to figure out something that could be extremely meme-tastic. So for card number 12, we're going to go over Egon, God of Death, and Throne of Death. Now, we don't really care about Egon, God of Death at all. We're going to more focus on Throne of Death. So Throne of Death is a 1 mana legendary artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, you mill a card. It also has the ability of pay 3 mana, tap exile target card from your graveyard, and draw a card. This is good on very, 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 very many different ways. Primarily what we're going to be using this for is going to be in all of our Eerie Ultimatum decks. So for our Eerie Ultimatum decks, for the most part, the only thing that we have issues with is going to be card draw for 1 or putting stuff into our graveyard for 2. And as for the fact that you're only going to be milling one card every turn, it is very slow, which does kind of suck. However, it is a 1 mana card that does mill every single turn. So it's return value. It's also something that you can do on turn 1 that's not just Stitcher Supplier. With that being said, it should be a lot easier to comfortably run 3 or 4 of each creature when you're running Eerie Ultimatum. So for the most part with Eerie Ultimatum, you're only going to want to run like 2 of each creature, because if you have more than 2 and you end up putting those into the graveyard, having more than one of each of those cards with the same name just does nothing, because Eerie Ultimatum will only get cards with different names from the graveyard. So being able to simply pay 3, tap, exile one of those 3rd or 4th copies of the creature and draw a card, I think is massively important. It's something to sink your mana into later on in the game. We may not have to run Tamiyo like we have been running in the past. It's probably still something that we will have to do, but it's also possible that we can simply run 4 Bolliged Recoveries, or maybe throw in Once in Futures instead, or maybe just flat out go 4 Cavalier of Thorns. Again, there's a couple things that we can actually do with this that is very, very potent and can be very impactful both early game and late game. Now, as for the worst case scenario, we just bring back a 3 mana 6/6 as Egon, God of Death, with Eerie Ultimatum, which also has Death Touch, which is kind of ridiculous. So at the beginning of your upkeep, exile 2 cards from your graveyard. If you can't, you sacrifice Egon and draw a card. So this is just good in and of itself because it's a 6/6 with Death Touch and it is only 3 mana. So it can be very good late game just as a 6/6 attacker, especially late game after we bring it back with Eerie Ultimatum, because if you bring it back with Eerie Ultimatum, you can't bring it back as the Throne of Death. It has to be the front side of the card, being Egon. So it's still a card that is very valuable, especially later on in the game when you're trying to push for the finishing attack or whatever it is you end up finishing with. Now, the other method of running Throne of Death is going to be in a deck with Gaia's Blessing. So Gaia's Blessing, if it's put into the graveyard from your library, you actually get to shuffle your graveyard into your library, which is just amazing. It's fantastic. If you're doing a lot of graveyard recursion, if you're just trying to cast as many spells as possible, you're doing a lot of cheap stuff like doing Assassin's Trophies and various 4-mana land destruction spells, and you really just want to fill your deck as much as possible. If you can thin out all of the lands with like Cultivates and Explorers and whatever else, as long as you're thinning out your deck of all the lands, just shuffling your graveyard back into your library consistently to get more and more and more spells with Throne of Death can be just so freaking powerful. I'm really excited to mess around with this in a couple different variations. And card number 13 is going to be Esika's Chariot. So super cute card, all the cats and shit. So it's a 4-mana 4/4 legendary vehicle. When it enters the battlefield, you create 2/2 green cat creature tokens. Totes adorbs, right? So whenever it attacks, you create a token that's a copy of target token you control. So we're just making copies of tokens. We're making tokens of tokens of tokens of tokens of tokens of tokens. But you also have to crew it for 4. It's easier to crew it, I say easier, because obviously when it comes into play, you're creating 2/2s. So you crew it with itself, basically. So those 2/2s, you crew the Chariot with that. The other way that we're able to actually turn this into a creature and swing with it is by using the Naked Karn's plus ability. So that plus ability reads, until your next turn, up to 1 target non-creature artifact becomes an artifact creature with the power and toughness, each equal to the converted mana cost. So Esika's Chariot would then be a 4/4, which it's already a 4/4 anyway, because it costs 4 mana. So we're basically plussing Karn to turn the Chariot into a 4/4 and then attacking with it. Now, as for the tokens that we actually want to copy with Esika's Chariot, we don't really have an answer to that. That's something we'll just kind of have to figure out along the way. But what we will want in order to optimize the value is going to be Anointed Procession. And that passive ability reads, if an effect would create 1 or more tokens under your control, it creates twice that many tokens instead. So basically, whenever we attack with Esika's Chariot, we're going to create 2 copies of a token instead of just 1. And this is obviously very, very good. I'm really just trying to abuse and optimize Esika's Chariot as much as possible. And of course, we're going to utilize things like Mythos of Aluna, Mirror Maid, just to copy anything that's on the board, really. So we can copy the opponent's creatures, the opponent's artifacts, planeswalkers, whatever. Although obviously we don't want to make duplicate copies of planeswalkers because they're legendary and all those other reasons. But it is something that we will have to keep in mind. If opponent drops something like a Mirari's Wake, we'll want to copy that, and we can make multiple copies of it with Esika's Chariot. It is very, very interesting. There's a lot of intricate things that we can do with this. However, it may get to the point where it's so intricate that it's just not viable and it's just not good. And it's definitely leaning more towards the it's probably not going to be good thing, because having to pay 4 mana to get Karn out, having to pay 4 mana to get Esika's Chariot out, having to pay 4 mana to get Anointed Procession out, although you don't have to have Anointed Procession out, you can kind of ignore that. But having those 2 4 mana costing things being Karn and Esika's Chariot, it is going to be difficult to keep both of those out and also have a worthwhile token that you want to copy. So that is the most difficult part. That's what we have to solve. Card 14 is actually one of the most interesting ones that I'm super excited about, which is Valki God of Lies / Tibalt Cosmic Impostor. Now, Valki God of Lies has some really interesting implications to it because of what it does. Valki is a 2-mana, 2/1 legendary god. Of course, just like the others, whenever it enters the battlefield, each opponent reveals their hand. For each opponent, exile a creature card they revealed this way until Valki leaves the battlefield. That alone is, kind of whatever. It's almost like a weird brain maggot type of situation. So, and then it has the ability of X, and then choose a creature card exiled with Valki with converted mana cost X. Valki becomes a copy of that card. This can be very good in many different ways. One of the best uses for this is turn 2, you play down Valki, you exile their Uro or their Kroza, something like that. The next turn, you pay 3 mana to turn it into the Uro, or 2 mana turn it into the Kroza, and you attack. This is a very, very powerful turn 3 play. I don't think anyone can debate that it's not a very powerful turn 3 play. So I'm interested to see how frequently people use this, because it can be so aggressively oppressive to a lot of these Sultai decks that are running around. And as for the later game, I'm not exactly sure how good it's going to be, because that's when things get a little bit more difficult as far as your creatures not being removed. It really just depends on how many other threats that you have as far as creatures go, or if you're going more on the control side of things, you can use cards like Thoughtseize and various other discard spells in order to protect Valki as much as possible, but it kind of depends on how you end up building the deck. Now, the main thing I like about this card is actually the other side, which is Tibalt Cosmic Impostor. It's 5 mana and then a black and red legendary planeswalker. Already very expensive, but 7 mana cards, kind of my specialty. The very unique part about this is that as it enters the battlefield, you automatically get an emblem right away that reads, you may play cards exiled with Tibalt Cosmic Impostor, and you may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast these spells. Now, I don't believe that this actually means it has to be exiled by that specific Tibalt. I believe if you have 4 Tibalts, you exile a couple cards with one of them, and then the second one, the third one. When you play the 4th one, I believe you can still play the cards from the previous 3. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm like 90% sure you can still do that. Now, he comes in with 5 loyalty, which is very underwhelming, especially for 7 mana. Does have a +2 ability, which is nice, so you automatically get him up to 7 for the most part. And the +2 ability is to exile the top card of each player's library. This is also not that great. It doesn't really do too much, especially the turn you bring it down, because if you're spending 7 mana to put them on the battlefield, you probably don't have any additional mana to really do anything with it at that point in time, so you have to wait an additional turn to really cast any of the cards that were exiled from either player's library. Now the -3 ability is exile target artifact or creature. This isn't fantastic. I wish you could hit enchantments and planeswalkers, at least planeswalkers. However, it's not the case. I understand that it doesn't hit enchantments because it's a black-red planeswalker and those colors just don't hit enchantments, unfortunately. But again, I really wish it would hit planeswalkers. Now the ultimate ability is going to be a -8, which really isn't that bad. So you really only have to have Tibalt alive for 2 turns. So he comes into play with 5 loyalty, and then you automatically +1 that same turn, that's 7. And then the next turn, give him 2 more, that's up to 9. And then the next turn, you can do a -8, bring him down to 1. So the -8 is exile all cards from all graveyards, including your own, and then you add triple red. Now triple red is very underwhelming. I wish it was more, but this is more of like a balanced planeswalker, kind of underwhelming for the most part, but it's balanced, I would say. Now with that being said, we can already mill ourselves with a lot of various black cards. I don't know if we want to be milling or actively milling the opponent's cards, but obviously we have the +2 ability to assist in the milling process. We can do discard spells that help with that. There's a lot of things that we can do to really get an impact from Tibalt's ultimate. I'm just not sure exactly how we're going to abuse it on that level without it being 100% not worth it. Now, in order to make this as much worth it as possible, we're going to have to use something like Lithoform Engine or Oath of Teferi. So with Lithoform Engine, we can actually copy the abilities. So if we want to do a -3 to exile target artifact or creature, we can actually pay 2 extra with the Lithoform Engine to copy that triggered ability and exile 2 creatures, which is nice. Oath of Teferi, we're able to activate the abilities twice, so we can do +2 2 times. When he comes out, and then just kind of go from there. We can immediately -8 that next turn and just kind of go from there. There's some interesting things that we can do with it. Obviously, if we add an Oath of Teferi, it becomes a 4-color deck, but then you're running Grixis colors, and you could add in the 7-mana Bolus with the 7-mana Tibalt, and then you get some lore in there, and it's just all sorts of interesting things that you can do with it. I don't know how good it's going to be. It feels like it's going to be bad. Most 7-mana planeswalkers are not very good, so it really just depends on how much damage it will take, or how many times people are like, I don't even care about this planeswalker, that type of thing. And I do have early access to Kaldheim on Wednesday, January 27th. So if you are currently watching this video on January 27th, you need to go over to twitch.tv/StriderStone to go watch me build all of these decks there right now. Card number 15 is going to be the World Tree. Now, the World Tree is just a land, and usually you can't brew around lands. I think the last land that we were truly able to brew around was Field of the Dead, and that got banned, so this has a high chance to also get banned, at least in my opinion, but we'll find out in the future. So the World Tree enters in tapped, which we don't really like since it's a forced tap land, and it just taps for a green source. But as long as you control 6 or more lands, which is pretty easy to do, especially, mid to late game, as long as you can survive aggro, right? All lands you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. Since I use Blood Sun a lot, I worry that the second ability of the World Tree is actually not going to take effect. So Blood Sun reads, all lands lose all abilities except mana abilities. Now again, the second part of World Tree reads, as long as you control 6 or more lands, lands you control have tap, add 1 mana of any color. Now this is technically not a mana ability because it's giving lands a mana ability, but I don't know exactly how those rules will shake up. It's something that we're going to have to test nonetheless, but it could be very good, it could be very bad. If it does shut down this land completely, we're going to want to run Blood Sun more frequently because of the fact that it's going to shut that down quite a bit, and that's going to be very good. However, we're going to run Blood Sun against this land anyway because of the third ability that it's going to shut down. And since I am a strong believer that this card may get banned, I think Blood Sun is going to be a very important card to actually counteract the World Tree. I do think it's going to be one of those lands that's going to be used a lot for that particular application. And The reason is because a lot of people are also going to be running Maskwood Nexus and or Arcane Adaptation. And again, this is specifically for historic, not standard, so you will have to keep that in mind. Because obviously Blood Sun is not in standard. The other card that you can use to help out with this that's a little bit cheaper is Arcane Adaptation. Arcane Adaptation is a 3-mana card that does essentially the same thing. As it enters the battlefield, choose a creature type, which we would choose God. Creatures you control are the chosen type in addition to their other types. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards you own that aren't on the battlefield. So again, we only care about gods, so them being every single creature type doesn't super matter. So being able to have it out 1 mana earlier could be relevant, but I'm not sure exactly how relevant. Card number 16. This is going to be one of the highest meme potential, but probably very, very bad cards, and nothing else but Koma Cosmos Serpent. The first amazing thing about Koma is that it can't be countered. I mean, yeah, it is 7 mana and that sucks, but it still can't be countered, which is good. It is a 7 mana 6/6, which is also not great. It doesn't even have a 1/1 CMC. Again, not very great. However, it has at the beginning of each upkeep, this includes yours and theirs, create a 3/3 blue serpent creature token named Koma's Coil. The second ability that Koma has is sacrifice another serpent and choose one. Tap target permanent, including lands. Its activated abilities can't be activated this turn. The other one being Koma, the Cosmos Serpent, gains indestructible till end of turn. This is very good. Again, you're getting a serpent on their turn and your turn, so you can basically permanently tap down a land of theirs every single turn, which is super, super funny. We like that. We like that a lot. Now, of course, we would have to have Anointed Procession in this deck. Anointed Procession being able to give us multiple tokens every single time, and that could be so beyond busted if we're making 2, 3, 4 serpents every single turn. And obviously we could just attack them and win at that point, but why would we do that when we could just tap all their lands and make sure they can't do anything with any of their mana, right? Because that's way more fun. The other card that will really push this to the next level is going to be Lithoform Engine. Now, I've mentioned Lithoform Engine so many times in this set review already, and I really think it's a jank enabler, especially with the new set. So either being able to make additional tokens or being able to tap multiple permanents with the sacrifice, depending on what you choose, it is a very good and unique way to play with this card. So if you need additional blockers, you can make additional blockers, or if you just want to do it on their turn by tapping multiple permanents, that's good too. And since we are going to be running the Cosmos Serpent and Anointed Procession, that means we're running green, blue, and white. So that means we have to run Dovin Bond. Obviously, 4 mana Planeswalker, 3 loyalty, has the ultimate of -7. You get an emblem with your opponent can't untap more than 2 permanents during their untap step. This is fucking hilarious. We're going to make it to where they can't untap anything, basically, or when they untap 2 things, we just tap them right away. So it's really, really mean. However, in the case of this ever happening without them surrendering is going to be slim to none. If we can even ultimate Dovin Bond, which is already almost impossible, it is going to be hilarious. I cannot wait to at least give this a try, give it a whirl, just see what happens. Card number 17, which is a card that a lot of people I think are going to be overly hyped over, and everyone is going to think it's going to be banned, which is definitely possible, is going to be Esika, God of the Tree, or on the flip side is the Prismatic Bridge. Esika is another god. It is a 3 mana 1/4 vigilance with tap, add 1 mana of any color. This is really good because it actually has a 4 but, although it does suck because it costs 3 mana. It does add mana of any color, which is kind of cool. And then it has another ability of other legendary creatures you control have vigilance and tap, add 1 mana of any color. I don't know how frequently or if at all that would be used, but maybe, who knows. However, on the flip side, we have the Prismatic Bridge, which is absolutely broken. It is 1 white, blue, black, red, green. So 1 of every color for a legendary enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature or planeswalker card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest of the bottom of your library in a random order. Now, this can be any creature, any planeswalker. So obviously this has so much potential to be absolutely busted. Now, of course, since this is a triggered ability, we can copy that with Lithoform Engine for 2 extra mana. So once we get the Prismatic Bridge down, next turn, untap phase comes at the beginning of our upkeep. All we got to do is pay 2 colorless mana, tap our Lithoform Engine, and copy this trigger. So for 2 mana, we get to put out 2 creatures and or planeswalkers onto the battlefield, which is absolutely insane. Getting 5 mana, 1 of every color, really isn't that difficult with the amount of mana fixing that we have, the different things that we have access to, being the new world tree, although that doesn't really take an effect until we have 6 lands, but we do also have Chromatic Lantern, and I think there's some other things. Paradise Druid will obviously help with that. Gift of Paradise doesn't really help with that because it adds 2 mana of any one color, but of course we do have all the triomes. This can be very, very good. I just don't know how easy it's going to be to get out on turn 5. Or earlier, I guess. If we can get this out reliably in any way, shape, or form, it's really easy to abuse because of the fact that it just is putting a creature or planeswalker into the battlefield. Every other card just gets put at the bottom of your library in a random order. So there's no downside to only having like 5 or 6 planeswalkers or 5 or 6 creatures. It can be all singleton creatures or singleton planeswalkers. So you can have like Liliana, Chandra, Dovin, Teferi, Garruk, Vraska, Ajani, Bolas, Ugin. Like, you can have all of these massive, huge planeswalkers and just get them all out for free. You can have huge creatures like Morog if you want an extra combat step, Sifter Worm to just to scry better, gain some life, Craterhoof for the beefy boys, Rakdos a showstopper for the memes, Meteor Golem, the Gear Hulks, Cavaliers. I mean, there's so many different things that you can do with it, and I just don't know if this is going to be in the format for very long before it gets banned. I really, really don't know. I think in Historic it's going to be abused a lot, and in Standard I'm not quite sure how easily it's going to be busted, but obviously everyone's going to use it with Ugin. And card number 18 is going to be the Phyrexian Facefucker 5000. This card is going to be so beneficial and so oppressive at the same time. I really don't know how this will not get banned very quickly. So this is a 6 mana, 6/6 legendary creature, Phyrexian of course, has trample and haste. If you were to put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead. If an opponent would put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, they put half that many on each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead, rounded down. So essentially, if you were to play a Saga, it would put both counter 1 and 2 right when you play it. If opponent were to play a Saga, it would put 0 counters on it because it would round it down. And next turn, it would not put another counter on it. And the next turn, it would not put another counter. It would just stay there until they remove the Phyrexian Facefucker 5000, right? So again, this can be very, very oppressive. It's the same exact thing with the plussing of planeswalkers. If they do a +1 on a planeswalker, their loyalty doesn't go up. They still get to get the actual benefit of that plus ability. So if it's like the 5 mana Teferi and they do a +1 to draw a card and then untap 2 lands, they still get to draw a card and untap 2 lands, but they don't actually count up the loyalty. So most likely if they have the 5 mana Teferi, they'll just, tuck it into your deck, but that's another story. And this is where it gets a little bit insane. So if we have the PFF 5K out, and then we play a Planeswalker, the Planeswalker comes into play, and then the loyalty counters are put onto it. So let's say we have a 5 mana Teferi, right? So we have the PFF 5K on the battlefield. We're going to play 5 mana Teferi. It automatically has enough counters on him to ultimate right when you play him. So you play him, and then you ult, and then you just go from there. That is ridiculous. There is no way that is okay. There's no way that's acceptable, but somehow that just is a way that's just a thing that they allowed to happen. They're like, yeah, this seems fine. Obviously, the best way to abuse this is going to be through Genesis Ultimatum, Eerie Ultimatum, and Sunbird's Invocation, something like that. So Genesis Ultimatum, you look at the top 5 cards of your library, put any number of permanent cards from among them onto the battlefield, the rest into your hand. So we can put, 5 Planeswalkers onto the battlefield, all at double their loyalty, and then ult all of them or whatever. However, you have to keep in mind that the Phyrexian Facefucker 5000 has to be on the battlefield before the Planeswalkers are put onto the battlefield. So you can't get the PFF 5K onto the battlefield with all of the Planeswalkers from Genesis Ultimatum, because that won't work that way. It has to be on the battlefield beforehand. And since it has to be on the battlefield beforehand, this is exactly why we're utilizing Sunbird's Invocation. So Sunbird's Invocation, 6 mana enchantment. Whenever you cast a spell from your hand, reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is that spell's converted mana cost. You may cast a card revealed this way with converted mana cost X or less without paying its mana cost, but the rest at the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is fantastic, right? We have Sunbird's Invocation out, and we cast Genesis Ultimatum. Genesis Ultimatum is 7 mana, right? And then the Sunbird's Invocation proc hit. So we're going to look at the top 7 cards of our library, and we're going to hope that the PFF 5K is within those 7 cards. We're going to cast the PFF 5K and get onto the battlefield for free. And then we're going to get all of the value from Genesis Ultimatum. So again, we're going to look at the top 5 cards from Genesis Ultimatum and put all of them onto the battlefield, however many Planeswalkers there are, or sagas, whatever you end up doing, and they just have double the counters. So again, this can be very, very broken very easily. It's just a matter of how greedy you want to get with it. The other thing that we can do, which is probably even more consistent, is going to be the Eerie Ultimatum. So you get to return any number of permanent cards with different names from your graveyard to the battlefield. This is going to be amazing. You can just do a lot of self-mill. As long as you get the PFF 5K on the battlefield and then cast Eerie Ultimatum to put down like Fall of the Thran, a bunch of Planeswalkers, a bunch of other sagas if you want. You just get so much value. You get a ton of different cards. You get like guaranteed value from the PFF 5K in a combination with Eerie Ultimatum. And Genesis Ultimatum is a little bit more volatile. It can be a hit or miss. A lot of times it's a miss. Sometimes it's a really good hit. But I think Eerie Ultimatum will be a lot more consistent. The reason I pick out these specific ultimatums is for the fact that they both are double green. They both require double green, and the PFF 5K is 4 colorless and a double green, so it's easier to cast in those specific decks that require those colors. Now, the 19th card that I'm going to go over is probably a card that none of you thought I was going to go over, and that is because it's a creature. And this is the Goldspan Dragon. It's a 5 mana 4/4 with flying and haste. The first ability of this creature is whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell doesn't have to be an opponent's control, create a treasure token. Now, as far as what spell we would actually target the Goldspan Dragon with that we control, I'm not exactly sure. A lot of the spells that we would want to target our own creatures with would be more buff related to make it stronger or more powerful, maybe indestructible, something like that. However, on those cases, they would turn into more of an aggro deck than some weird like big red list. So I'm not exactly sure what we will do with that yet, but we'll figure it out. The thing that does kind of suck about this creature is that it is 5 mana for a 4/4, although it does have haste, and so you can attack with it right away, and it will net you 1 treasure token. And treasure tokens are very good with this creature out because of the second ability. Treasures you control have tap, sacrifice this artifact, add 2 mana of any one color instead of just 1. With this ability, this makes Treasure Map and Smothering Tithe a way bigger threat and a way better card. So I think this has a very good place in a couple decks, but it's very, very niche. And again, I believe you're going to have to run some other creatures or at least a lot more land destruction type of control to prevent them from removing this creature from the battlefield in order for you to truly utilize how much mana you can get from your treasures. Now, if you're going to play Goldspan Dragon with Smothering Tithe, I believe it's going to pressure the opponents into paying for the mana in order to prevent you from having a treasure token more, which can be both good and bad. Being able to cut off their mana sources is very, very good, and also if they don't, for whatever reason, getting 2 mana can be very, very powerful. So with all that mana, we would obviously need some type of mana sink. Any type of big mana sink like Banefire, Electro Dominance, even something as simple as a Dawn of Hope can go a long way with this card. Either way, this dragon is going to be really interesting to mess around with. I don't know how good it will really be in the long run. It's probably better staying in the limited type of format than it is an actual constructed. However, it's definitely something I'm going to mess around with because I really do like Treasure Map and Smothering Tithe. It's just I have trouble justifying using those because treasures are a lot of times underwhelming. That concludes all of the cards I'm most excited to brew around. And again, if you are watching this on January 27th, make sure to go check out my stream at twitch.tv/StriderStone. I should be streaming all of these decks and all of these cards that I'm going over right now. Did you really think that I would do a card review and not go over Waking the Trolls? Get the fuck out of here. And the 20th card, last but not least, Waking the Trolls. I mean, it's me in a card. So this is a 6 mana saga, 4 colorless, a green and a red, to destroy target land. It's kind of bad for 6 mana. However, the next turn, you get to put a target land card from any graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. So this can be the land you destroyed. This can be a land that you milled into your graveyard. This can be a land that you sacrificed to go fetch a land so you can do it again, help thin out your deck. There's a couple things you can do. Then, of course, the 3rd chapter of the saga, choose target opponent. If they control fewer lands than you, create a number of 4/4 green troll warrior creature tokens with trample, equal to the difference of lands. So if your opponent has 3 lands and you have 4 lands, you create 1 4/4 green troll warrior. And since this is a land destruction card with a built-in win condition, this has so many implications. This makes 4 mana land destruction very good. This makes land-based land destruction a lot better. However, I don't know if it's good yet, but it is something we're definitely going to explore. Now, the hindrance that 4 mana land destruction had before was the fact that it just really didn't do anything. It gave them less lands, but it didn't do anything outside of that. It didn't prevent them from doing anything outside of casting big cards. It didn't give you an advantage outside of you having more mana, but now it's going to give you a 4/4 green troll warrior with trample, essentially. So the 4 mana land destruction cards that we're going to use more often than not would be Creeping Mold, the new Smashing Success, Rubble Reading, and Demolish. Those would be the 4 main 4 mana land destruction cards that we would use. And again, this could be very, very oppressive and be very powerful. And of course, one of the other things that we can do is use Lithoform Engine to copy the very last triggered ability of creating double the amount of creatures, or we can use Anointed Procession out to double the amount of tokens that way as well, or we can use both. There's so many different things that we can do with this, and it can be very, very funny. Obviously, Mythos of Luna to copy the saga. And again, if we have Anointed Procession out, we'll copy it twice, doing additional land destruction, like more and more land destruction. There is so much potential here, and I'm very, very excited to mess around with this. And probably the most extreme version of getting this out is going to be with Fall of the Thran and Heroic Intervention. So let's say turn 6, you throw out Waking the Trolls, you destroy land. Turn 7, you play a land and take their land, so now you have 8 mana. You're going to play Heroic Intervention, and then you're going to play Fall of the Thran. So we have destroyed every land except for ours, because all of our lands are indestructible from Heroic Intervention. And then the next turn happens, and we create 4/4 green troll warriors based on the land difference, since they have 0 lands unless they played one on their turn, and we have all of our lands being at least 8. It is Like, that's a lot of creatures. If they have one land and we have 8, that's 7 4/4s with trample. It's going to be extremely difficult to come back from that, if at all. And as for yesterday's comment question of the day, I asked you, what card are you most excited for me to brew around? Here are your answers. And if you want your comment featured in these videos, make sure that you answer the comment question of the day every single day, 7 days a week in the comment section below. And that's going to conclude all 20 cards that I'm really excited to brew around when Kaldheim comes out. If you are watching this on Wednesday, January 27th, I will be brewing with all of these cards over at twitch.tv/StriderStone, so make sure to go check that out over there. If you missed the first 10 cards, make sure to check in on yesterday's video. Yo, what up, YouTube? Yeah, we going here, Strider. Come on. You didn't really think that I was that type of person, did you? Thank you everyone so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. If you were even a little bit entertained by this video, please make sure to let me know down below. And if you have anything that you would like to see next, go ahead and leave that there too. And make sure to check out my live stream 5 days a week, every day except Sunday and Thursday. Stream times down below.